Today, we will examine Chapter 1, An Introduction to Visual Studio, 2019-2022 and Visual Basic. Let's start with the basics. Programming is just giving a computer step-by-step instructions to complete a task. When you put those instructions together, you've got a program. We use programming languages like Visual Basic or Java to write these instructions in a way the computer can understand. So really, programming is just telling a computer exactly what to do and how to do it. Alright, now that we know what programming is, let's talk about how we actually do it. We use something called an IDE that stands for Integrated Development Environment. Think of it as your all-in-one toolkit. It's where you write your code, run it, test it, and fix any mistakes all in one place. In this class, we'll be using Visual Studio, which comes with the Visual Basic language built in. Now, when you create a program, you usually want users to interact with it. That's where a GUI, or Graphical User Interface, comes in. It's the part of the program the user sees. Buttons, text boxes, menus, all that good stuff. When you combine the interface and the instructions that make it work, that's what we call an application. Let's talk about what a programmer actually does. A programmer steps in when a company has a problem requiring a computer-based solution, like tracking sales, scheduling appointments, or processing payroll. This could be someone on staff or a freelancer brought in just for the job. The first step is for the programmer to talk to someone who understands the problem. This might be the end user or a software developer who acts as a go-between. That developer meets with the user, figures out their needs, and then shares those details with the programmer. Once the problem is clearly understood, the programmer starts planning a solution. After the plan is solid, they code, turning the solution into instructions a computer can follow. But it doesn't stop there. The programmer has to test the program thoroughly using sample data to ensure that it works as it should and that the user is happy with it. And for bigger projects, it's not just one person. Teams of programmers might work together, sometimes even with subject matter experts like accountants or engineers, to make sure the program does what it needs to do. Now let's look at the language we'll be working with, Visual Basic. Visual Basic is what we call an Object-Oriented Programming Language, or OOP for short. That basically means we build programs using objects, things like buttons, checkboxes, or list boxes. If you've ever clicked a button in a Windows app, you've interacted with an object. Here's the cool part. Every object in a program comes from something called a class. Think of a class like a blueprint or a cookie cutter. It defines how the object should look and act. When we use it to make something in our program, we call that an instance of the class, or say it's been instantiated. So, the class is like the cookie cutter, and the objects you use in your program, those are the cookies. As we move forward, you'll run some Visual Basic apps that use several of these objects. Don't worry, we'll break them down together as we go. Let's get familiar with the workspace we'll use, Visual Studio. It's an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, and it comes packed with different windows that each serve a specific purpose. The main one you'll spend a lot of time in is the Designer window. That's where you'll build your app's graphical user interface, the stuff your users will see and click on. The blank area is called a form, the starting point of your app's interface. It's an object that comes from the Windows Form class and is automatically created for you when you start a new project. Next up is the Toolbox window. Think of it like your toolbox in a garage, full of tools like buttons, text boxes, and picture boxes. Each tool in that list represents a class. When you drag one onto your form, you're creating, or as we say, instantiating, an object from that class. Once an object is on the form, it has settings you can adjust. These are called properties. They control how the object looks and behaves. You can view and change these in the Properties window. For example, you can change the title of the form by editing its text property. Then there's the Solution Explorer. This shows everything in your project. images, forms, code files, you name it. Visual Studio organizes your work using solutions and projects. A solution is like a big folder that can hold one or more projects. Each project has all the files related to that specific app. Finally, we have the code editor window. This is where the actual instructions go. Don't worry if it looks overwhelming at first. Just know that this is where you'll tell your app how to respond when someone clicks a button or does something else in the interface. You'll get plenty of hands-on time with all of this, and we'll walk through it together as we go. Let's talk a little more about properties, specifically one of the most important ones, the name property. Every object in your application has a set of properties, things that define how it looks and behaves. But the name property is special because it's how you refer to that object in your code. So for example, if you want to tell a button what to do when it's clicked, you need to know its name, like button exit or button show. That name is what the code uses to point to the right object. Typically, you'll only name objects that you'll use in your code. Things like buttons, picture boxes, and forms usually get a custom name, so you can easily reference them when writing instructions. Alright class, let's wrap up what we've learned in Chapter 1. We started by explaining what programming actually is, just giving the computer a set of instructions to follow. We discussed what a program is, what programmers do, and how we use special programming languages like Visual Basic to write those instructions. Then we looked at the Visual Studio IDE, which is the environment where we'll build and test our applications. You were introduced to key parts of the IDE, like the designer window, where you build your app's layout, the toolbox, which holds all the controls you can drag onto your form, the properties window, where you tweak how things look and behave, and the solution explorer, which keeps everything organized. We also talked about object-oriented programming and how everything we work with in Visual Basic, buttons, forms, labels, is an object created from a class. Each object has properties like its name, size, or color. Most importantly, we learned that the name property is key when writing code because it lets us refer to that object by name. As we progress, we'll start writing actual code and connecting it to your design objects. Don't worry if it still feels new or overwhelming. That's normal. Just keep practicing and exploring Visual Studio, and things will start to click. You've now got a solid foundation to build on. Great work finishing Chapter 1. Next up, we dive into writing code that actually does something.